When you think about world politics, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it power struggles, constant conflict? Well, that's the classic realist view. But there's a completely different way to look at things, the liberal tradition. And it offers a much more optimistic blueprint, one where human reason and cooperation can actually build a more peaceful world. So let's dive into this really influential way of seeing things.
This is the big question, isn't it? For centuries, this is what everyone's been grappling with. Are we just doomed to repeat the same cycles of violence over and over again? Or can we actually build something better? The answer you give really depends on your starting point, on your basic assumptions about how the world works.
And here you can see the two competing visions side by side. On the one hand, you have the realist worldview, which is, fundamentally pessimistic. It sees a world with no global government, what they call anarchy, where all the states are just locked in a constant struggle for power. But on the other hand, you have the liberal view, which is built on a powerful sense of optimism. It places its bets on human reason, on the idea that we can make progress, and on the power of cooperation.
So to really get a handle on how liberals believe that cooperation is even possible, we first have to dig down to the bedrock, the philosophical foundation their theories are built on. These are the core beliefs that shape their entire view of world politics.
Okay, so it all really boils down to three big ideas. First, a positive view of human nature. Liberals have this incredible faith in our ability to reason. They believe that even though we're all self-interested, we can use our brains to work together for mutual gain. Second, a genuine belief in progress. For a liberal, history isn't just one bad thing after another. They believe that with modernization, we can see real, actual progress in our social and political lives. And third, it's all about the individual. The ultimate goal isn't just about state power. It's about the happiness and the freedom of individual human beings.
And, these ideas aren't new. They've got really deep roots. You have thinkers like John Locke, who argued that the whole point of a state is to protect individual liberty. You've got Jeremy Bentham, who actually came up with the term international law, and he believed that rational states would see it's in their best interest to follow it. And then there's Immanuel Kant, who had this vision of a world of republics that could achieve a perpetual peace. These guys really laid all the groundwork.
Okay, so how did those foundational ideas turn into the modern theories we talk about today? Well, after World War II, they kind of branched out into four main strands of thought. You can think of them as four different but connected pathways to building a more cooperative and peaceful world.
So the first pathway is sociological liberalism. This one argues that we can't just look at governments talking to other governments. International relations is also about the connections between people, between different groups, between whole societies. And this is a huge idea, because it suggests that peace isn't just built by presidents signing treaties. It's built by countless little connections between businesses, activists, and just ordinary people.
And this slide is such a great way to picture the difference. Realists see the world as a bunch of billiard balls, these hard-shelled states that just bounce off and collide with each other. But sociological liberals, they see a complex cobweb. In this model, people and groups have all these overlapping ties that cross borders, and that creates a really dense network that makes any big conflict between any two sides much less likely. Right, our second pathway is interdependence liberalism. This one is all about mutual dependence. The idea is simple. When countries rely on each other for trade and for their economies to grow, the cost of going to war just goes through the roof. There's an old saying that sums it up perfectly. When goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. A high level of economic interdependence just makes cooperation the more rational and, frankly, the more profitable choice.
And this table here really shows you just how profound that shift is. Thinkers like Keohane and Nye called this new world complex interdependence. Just look at the changes. The key players are no longer just states. You have all these other transnational groups that are critical. The main goal isn't just military security anymore. Economic welfare becomes just as, if not more important. And the tools of power? They expand way beyond just the military to include economic and institutional tools. It's a whole new ballgame.
Which brings us to our third pathway, institutional liberalism. Now, a realist might look at organizations like the UN and just dismiss them, but institutional liberals argue they are absolutely critical. They're the architecture of peace. They provide a set of rules and a place to meet that helps countries overcome the deep mistrust that's just natural in a world without a global 911.
So how do they actually do that? Well, for one, institutions provide a steady flow of information, so countries aren't just guessing what their neighbors are up to. They create places for negotiation, they help governments check if everyone's actually following the rules, and at the end of the day, they build confidence that agreements are going to be solid. They basically reduce fear by increasing transparency.
And finally, we get to the fourth and maybe the boldest pathway, Republican liberalism.
This is where you find one of the most famous claims in all of international relations, the idea that democracies do not fight other democracies. Now, democracies might still go to war with non-democracies, but there is some powerful evidence that they've managed to create a separate, more peaceful world just among themselves.
So why is that? What's the secret? Well, Republican liberals will point to three main reasons. First, democracies are used to solving problems peacefully at home, and they tend to use those same habits when dealing with other democracies. Second, they share a foundation of common moral values about individual rights, which creates what Kant called a Pacific Union, a kind of zone of peace. And third, you see those other liberal theories kicking in. They are often deeply, deeply connected through trade and economic ties.
Okay, so we have these four pretty powerful liberal arguments for why cooperation works. But how do they hold up under pressure? It's time for the stress test, the great debate with their biggest critics, the neorealists.
This quote from a neorealist scholar pretty much sums up their entire argument. For them, it doesn't matter what superficial changes you see, more trade, more democracies, whatever. The fundamental structure of the world doesn't change. It's still an anarchic system, and that structure forces states to compete for power and security, no matter what they look like on the inside.
And it all comes down to this one crucial disagreement about cooperation. Liberals focus on what they call absolute gains. They ask a simple question: will this deal make me better off than I was before? If the answer is yes, then let's cooperate. But neorealists, they focus on relative gains. They ask, wait a minute, who's going to gain more from this deal? For them, letting another country get a bigger piece of the pie is super dangerous, because they could use that extra power against you later. This fear is a massive barrier to cooperation.
So, where does that leave us? Has the liberal vision of progress really transformed the world, or are we still stuck in that neorealist trap of power politics? Let's take a look at the verdict.
And if you just look at the data, it seems to tell a pretty liberal story. Check out these trends over the last 50 years or so. The core ingredients of the liberal project have just exploded. The global level of democracy, world trade as a percentage of everything, the sheer number of international organizations. By these numbers, the world today looks fundamentally more liberal than it did back in 1970. And this is exactly the argument that strong liberals make. They say, look, this isn't just some superficial change. The world has been fundamentally rewired. That cobweb of connections is real. The institutions are strong, and inside that core group of established democracies, a security community has been created, where the idea of war between them is just unthinkable. They argue we've actually moved beyond the raw, dangerous anarchy that neorealists are always talking about.
But this is the world we live in now. The liberal order is clearly under a lot of pressure, from rising powers that play by different rules, from nationalist movements, from all sorts of global challenges. So the question isn't just whether this optimist blueprint can hold. The real question is, after decades of incredible progress, are we watching this great liberal experiment begin to unravel, or is this just another major stress test that it was ultimately built to withstand?